We can't stop here. It's Bigfoot country.
I grew up in the woods of Minnesota. My friends and I had the run of hundreds of acres of woods around us, and we got to know every tree, pond and stream in these woods. We hiked, camped every hill, valley and field, biked and snowmobiled the paths. For a young teen, it was a great life. We would tell our parents that we were going camp, and off we would go into the woods with nothing but a buck knife, fishing pole, wrist rocket or .22 rifle, and an old blanket. We would catch fish, shoot squirrels and rabbits for dinner. 13 or 14 years old, and we were the servicemen. What boy would not want to live like this? We were the lost boys, and these woods were ours. When I see these kids today with their video games, I just think they've never skinned a rabbit or eaten crayfish cooked in an old coffee can. Our woods? Well, we had no idea. This was 1974. I had never heard of a Bigfoot. Everything I knew was from television or from school, and topics like Bigfoot was not something seen on television or talked about at school. I watched nature shows. Mutual of Omaha was the one great nature show. Those poor chumps would carry huge film cameras out to the middle of nowhere and shoot movies of elk. Bigfoot was way off anyone's radar. I know that Native Americans knew all about them, but for a bunch of white kids, hell no. We had a friend named Brian that lived up the main paved road a couple of miles in an old farmhouse kind of place. We would bike up the road, but it was more fun to take the trails in the woods to his house. We did this all the time. Hell, I took the trail alone in the woods sometimes and never thought of any danger. But after this one day, I never went into the woods alone. Brian was at my house, and we were going to go up to his house that day and decide to take the trails. It started out like every other time we biked the trails to his house. We got to a part of the trail where there was a long, slow uphill grade. It wasn't steep, just long, and a gradual long uphill grind that eventually wore you down. We would always try to pedal as far as we could, till we just couldn't anymore and had to walk. Brian was in ahead of me, and I remember him getting off his bike, so I did too. I think being hot and tired, we didn't say anything and started to walk our bikes up the hill. For some reason, I looked to my left, and in the woods in a low brush area was a big dark brown or black figure standing looking at us. It turned and ran through a bush that was at least 5 feet tall, and this thing was another 4 feet above the bush. Note, this thing didn't go around, but I remember it running through this bush and vanishing down the slope into the woods. I turned to look at Brian, and he was on his bike pedaling up the hill. I gave a running start and jumped on my bike, and followed as fast as I could. It wasn't till we got out of the woods into the field next to Brian's house when we stopped again. What was that? I don't know. It was big. Let's keep going to my house. We talked more about the incident when we got to Brian's house, but because we couldn't compare it to anything, it was hard to talk about. Time went on, and the incident faded from our minds, till one day my family and I were watching television, and the Patterson footage of Bigfoot came on. I was shocked. Was this what we saw in our woods? Was that thing a Bigfoot? The next day I explained what I saw on the television and asked Brian if he thought that is what we saw. I still remember him looking at me and saying, "I don't want to talk about it." I was shocked. This was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. We saw a Bigfoot and he didn't want to talk about it? I pressed the subject again and he said, "Hey, I don't want to talk about it." I still know Brian, and through the years I will bring the incident up, and he still won't talk about it. It is like he would rather not have had it happen to him, like a victim of trauma or something. He's not a philosopher or into talking about esoteric things like I am. Some people aren't, I guess. Some people are just happy being. I suppose Brian is one of those people, and I am a gotta know everything kind of person. Sometimes I wonder what I saw, then I think of Brian's reaction to it and think, no, we did see a Bigfoot that day. My family is Russian. Both my parents are from Siberia, and were both born in a city called Omsk. Anyways, a couple of days ago my dad and I got into a conversation that kept deviating from the original topic, and eventually reached a point when we started talking about paranormal occurrences in our lives. I asked him why he believes in Yetis. A long time ago he told me he believes in Yetis, but didn't explain why. My dad is not the type of guy who believes in paranormal activity. He thinks ghosts and aliens are all BS. And it was to my surprise that he believes in Yeti, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, he sits up straight, clears his throat, and tells me the following. My dad is 51 years old, and in his 20s, he served in the military. He served in a place called Sputnik, a village close to the Russian border with Norway. If you look it up, you can still see the barracks and the whole military camp itself. Pretty fascinating. All heavy-duty military supplies were always stored far away, even from the military camps itself, and kept as far away as possible from human activity, typically in a forest. One day a group of 10 people, one of whom was my father, were tasked to go on an expedition to the warehouse to restock military supplies in the camp. This required many people because loading up the trucks with very heavy equipment and ammunition was a rather grueling task. My father gets in the truck together with the others and gets on the road. They reached the place far later than anticipated because of something along the lines of, "We got a flat tire." The place they were going to is located near a city that's on the bank of one of the hundreds of rivers you can see on the map. The place was called Lovozera. They get there during the night. The only thing that was illuminating the forest were the stars. Since it was so dark and everyone was so tired, they decided to sleep over at the warehouse. They slept over at a dugout, not too far away. Once they get there, everyone takes their spot on the floor and says goodnight. But no matter how much my dad was tired, he couldn't fall asleep. He stayed up for another 30 minutes before standing up and seeing everyone with their eyes open. No one was asleep. He had thought he was the only one awake, but he wasn't. The thing that was keeping him up was a sense of discomfort that he couldn't explain, and he decided to share this with the others. Everyone nods and says that they are all experiencing the exact same thing. This wouldn't let them rest peacefully. Eventually, another 30 minutes go by and the discomfort has now evolved into a mild fear and panic. At this point, everyone is really concerned because they've got to wake up early tomorrow to move heavy boxes, and sleeping was essential. They keep laying in silence. All of a sudden, they hear a very strong thump on the roof of the building. The thumping persists, and it sounds as if someone extremely heavy is walking on the roof. The roof was wooden. It was a sod roof, with grass covering it, and my dad could tell for a fact that it was someone walking because of the creaking the boards made. Simultaneously, everyone, as discovered the next day, starts hyperventilating, and everyone's hearts start beating extremely fast. The thumping the creature made was so loud it resonated in my dad's ears, and he felt his insides shake. One of the guys passed out. At a certain point, the creature descended from the roof and started walking around the dugout. And one of the guys that was proud enough to open his eyes and look around said that the creature was peeking inside, but since it was dark, he could only see a silhouette. Eventually, whatever it was that was causing all of this left, and everyone went back to sleep. The next day, one of my dad's buddies asked a passing by local about this phenomenon, and he said it was completely in the ordinary. He even called it a specific name, which unfortunately my dad does not remember. Also consider the fact that this all happened during the times of the Soviet Union. As you may or may not know, the Soviet Union was a complete atheist state. No cults, no belief in spirits, no religion, and people who believed in that sort of stuff were frowned upon. My father and the 9 other soldiers were ideology-packed elite troops, and honestly, hearing this from him sounded crazy. And I knew for a fact it was real. Back in 1989, I was with my boyfriend, Eddie, his best friend, my older sister Angie, and about 6 other people. We had spent the entire day mudding in the Royal Palm mudflats in Royal Palm Beach, Florida, aka part of Palm Beach County. I grew up in West Palm Beach. I had never seen anything like this before or since. After mudding all day, we decided to call it a night and leave. Almost everyone was gone by then, so we all piled into Eddie's truck and left. Eddie saw a small mud hole and drove through it as one last hurrah for the night. We got stuck. That small hole was deceptive. When I say we got stuck, I mean we were stuck for hours. I was pregnant with my first, so I was steering as the other 9 were pushing. That truck didn't budge. We had no choice but to wait until morning for someone to come pull us out, as we were now on our own. At about 5 a.m, we decided we should just relax and try to sleep until someone came through. Eddie, I and his bestie were in the front. My sister and the other 6, who we are still friends with till today, piled into the back and started to settle down. We were still making noise when I heard a sound. It was a rumbling growl. I knew immediately that it was some type of animal. I told everyone to hush and listen. Then we all heard it, and it was getting louder and more aggressive sounding. Eddie has a KC light behind his seat. He popped out, grabbed it, plugged it in, and lit the night up. That's when our world changed. 10 of us had our world rocked in a way we never expected. This thing ducked down and moved. Everyone was starting to freak out because it was clearly there. But what was it? Then it got pissed. This thing stood straight up, let out a roar that I can still hear 31 years later, leapt the larger bush it was standing behind, and charged us. You could feel the earth literally shake with every running step it took. It was easily 8 to 9 feet tall. It was broad. It looked like an extremely large man with hair, not fur. It had hair and lots of it. The KC light lit it up, and you could see the clumping of the hair. The smell was rotten and sour. Being pregnant, I was extremely sensitive to smells, and it was bad. We had spent hours, we're talking 5+ hours, trying to push this truck out. They all say adrenaline gives you super strength. They are right. Eddie turned on his truck and started pushing on his door frame. His bestie leapt out his side and did the same. My sister and the other 6 let out screams as they piled out, and then all you heard was this thing running and roaring. Everyone else was dead silent as they put everything they had into pushing this truck out, with a sucking pop that also I can still hear. We were out, and they were throwing themselves into the back as Eddie and his bestie jumped in and he floored it. This is woods with tight turns, and we flew around those turns. It felt like the devil himself was chasing us. After we got out and onto the main road, we headed for a gas station to calm down and call our families. When we got there, we all got out, sat with our backs to the wall, and that was it. We never said a word to each other, just silence. I think we were too raw, scared, and in complete shock over what happened. This was law. This wasn't real. They don't exist. Yet there it was. After we all called our parents, we went home. One by one being dropped off. Not a word spoken. My sister and I did not discuss this until about 5 years ago. We finally opened up about that night and have slowly talked to the others. 25 years after the fact, and every single one of us that have spoken about it have the same exact story and memory forever burned into our minds. It wasn't cool. It was scary. I think the reason we couldn't talk about it for so long was because our brains were in denial at first. and then we didn't know how to open up about it. Now we can look back and say, holy crap, we saw freaking Bigfoot. Hi, I am from Mumbai, India. I first heard about Bigfoot as a kid, watching National Geographic. I always knew about Yetis residing in deep Himalayan hills and wondered about any Bigfoots possibly living in India. So what I'm about to tell you was a shocker for me when I heard it. My family had a New Year's Day gathering, and all of my cousins had come over for lunch. We usually talked about sports and politics, but that was too boring after a while, so I decided to tell my cousins about unknown creatures like the Loch Ness Monster, the Dogman, etc. And I started off by telling them about Bigfoot, and how the legend of Bigfoot runs wild amongst Americans and many people around the world. I was not prepared for what was going to happen next. My dad and my grandpa overheard the conversation and came to my room and stood in utter disbelief that I knew about Bigfoot. And I realized, just by looking at their eyes, that they knew more about it than I have ever read or seen. In utter shock, my dad started telling me about a story of his childhood. When he was around 12 years old, along with my grandpa, that he had encountered something which defied belief. I still have tears in my eyes when I write this, as this was a surreal moment for me, to know that these creatures do exist in India as well. He said on a cold winter's evening around 7 o'clock in 1972, my grandpa and my dad were coming back from church, and the road that led to the house had acres of sugarcane farm with tall bushes on both sides of the road. They were on a 110cc scooter, which could be converted to a bicycle if it ran out of fuel, and this came in handy as they lived in the countryside far away from town. While they were passing by a huge banyan tree, something just ran out of the sugarcane farm on the left and crossed the road. This thing was 20-25 feet away. My grandpa described it as a huge 8 or 9 foot hairy ape-like creature with dark black fur. The creature was on 2 legs, almost like a gorilla who had learnt to walk like a man. The creature crossed the road in an instant and went to the other side of the road and saw my dad and grandpa. And at that very moment, my dad screamed out of fear, looking at this hairy creature with massive pecs and shoulders. This led to the creature running away into the field. The speed at which the creature ran was absolutely shocking, and my granddad knew this low-powered bike wouldn't do any good if the creature decided to pursue them. Thankfully, this creature decided to leave them alone, and was never seen again. This was the encounter that changed their lives, and raised their curiosity in the subject. They never spoke of it, in fear of being ridiculed, but when they saw me speak about Bigfoot, they knew they were not alone, and many people in the world had experienced what they had seen. My dad even went on to say about a man he knew who filmed one of these creatures, but never knew what they were called, and thought it was some kind of an ape. People in India would generally not know about such cryptids. I saw the truth of the story in my grandpa's eyes, and never have I felt such strong conviction to tell a story like this. I know this may sound weird, but there are accounts of Bigfoot encounters in deep rural India. I don't know what the thing which my granddad and dad saw was, but I'm sure it was certainly not a gorilla walking on 2 feet. I've only shared this experience with a few people in the years since it happened. It was the first Tuesday of the Pennsylvania deer rifle season, December 3rd, 2013. I've always been an avid hunter, and would wake up very early in the morning to get into the woods before daylight. I would be in the woods at 4:30 in the morning. Having to hunt on state game lands meant beating other people into the woods to get a decent spot. When I got to the parking area around 4:15 AM, no one else was there. So I walked into the woods, not using a flashlight, only walking by moonlight. I walked through a field into the tree line and started on the path to my spot. I came to the intersection in the path. One way went left and down the mountain. The other way went right. I went right because my spot was on the other side. Roughly 50 yards after making the right-hand turn, I smelled what I could only describe as hot garbage. It hit me in the face. Hot dumpster juice in the middle of August. So I stopped dead, turned on my flashlight expecting to see piles of garbage. Nothing. No garbage, nothing dead. Just hot garbage smell. Keep in mind, this is in December. It's cold out. High 20s to low 30s. So even if there was garbage, it shouldn't smell that bad. So I kind of thought nothing of it. I followed a path to my spot, which was down over the ridge from the garbage smell, roughly maybe 40 feet down, that leads into a grass field where I would sit. I set up my seat, got settled in for about 2 minutes. That's when the rocks started coming down the ridge. First rock startled me, causing me to turn my light on again, scanning the field hoping to see eye reflection of a deer, but nothing was there. I sat back down. Another rock comes down the ridge. This time I stand up and go out into the grass field with flashlight and the pistol that I carry while hunting. I scanned again, nothing. Purposely waited in the field for about 5 minutes. Now I'm getting angry, assuming another hunter is messing with me because I'm in their spot. I sit down again. The third rock, sounding larger than the others, comes tumbling down the ridge. I don't get up this time. Not 2 minutes after that, another rock, not tumbled, but sounded as though it was thrown off the ridge and landed in the field. Now fuck it, I'm pissed. I gathered up my gear and started back up the trail to the ridge. I get on top of the ridge, scanning with my light the whole time. Nothing. No eyes, no other hunter. I get to the spot where I smelled the hot garbage. Nothing. The smell is gone. Finally, it clicked in my head. It may not have been another person. Possibly something else. I've heard other stories of people's Bigfoot experiences, a lot of which remark about how bad they smell. Fuck this. I all but ran out of the woods. And to top it all off, no other vehicles were in the parking area when I got out of the woods. This took place in Pennsylvania State Game Lands 229, outside of Tremont in Schuylkill County. I later came to find out that a coworker of mine had actually seen a bipedal cross in front of his car within 2 miles of location of my experience. So maybe they're real, I don't know, but I definitely had an experience that I won't forget. I feel it's just an obligation to say that I too am a skeptic. I've been trying to convince myself that I didn't see a large hairy humanoid thing in the woods all those years ago. But I did. This was somewhere around the mid-2000s, when I was in middle school. I was staying at my friend's house for the night, in the backwoods of Michigan. We'll say his name is Jay. Immediately behind Jay's house was a few acres of woods that led to a lake. If you went straight back into the woods from his backyard, there was a path that went straight to the lake, which was intersected at 90 degrees by another path about halfway to the lake. If you went straight down the path from the backyard and turned left at the intersection, the path was a downhill grade, followed by a flat portion, followed by an uphill grade, which eventually ran into a 2-lane country road, one of those 55 miles per hour ones that goes on for miles with not so much as 1 or 2 houses for miles. It was late in the afternoon and the sun was just starting to set. We, being middle school boys, were running around the woods all afternoon, playing with fake guns and stuff. Good times. Absolutely nothing leading up to this point was strange. No weird, eerie feelings. No odd, unidentified sounds. No paranoia or ghost stories prior to playing in the woods. Just 2 bros, running around having a great time outside. Well, we were basically pretending we were army guys. At one point, Jay decided to run off saying something about flanking the enemy, He dashes off to my left. I started creeping through the woods, pretending to shoot down bad guys as I went. I found myself standing at the intersection described earlier. Straight forward was towards the lake. To the left was the path that went down, then back up to the road. I was standing looking diagonally between the two paths when I hear some faint sound slightly off to my right, towards the lake. What I saw made my whole body tingle, in the worst possible way. About 50 feet, maybe more, maybe less, towards the lake, and just behind a tree, I see this face and shoulder/arm peeking around it. The most terrifying part was that it was probably 2 feet or more higher than you'd expect a human's head to be. Before I could properly observe the face, which was undoubtedly hairy, it snapped back behind the tree, as if it realized I could see it. The color of the figure I saw was light grey, like your average cement sidewalk. Because of that, I was unsure of what it was. My first couple of thoughts were sheer confusion and fear. Then in my frozen state, I remembered that Jay was wearing a shirt almost exactly that shade of grey. I tried whisper shouting his name towards the now hidden figure. I called out maybe 2 or 3 times when, off about 50 feet behind me and to my left, down the path leading towards the road, Jay emerged from the thicker trees. This was the complete opposite direction from the figure I saw, and there's no way he could have snuck around me in that short of a time frame. To further drive the point home, it was fall, and the ground was covered in layers of dry, dead, deciduous leaves. The crunch from the leaves was very distinct and you couldn't avoid it. Anyways, Jay had heard me call out, and from just down the slight decline, he looked up and asked what was going on. I pointed off into the trees where I'd seen the figure and said at normal volume, "I saw something big over there." As soon as I finished that sentence, I mean the very second, whatever I had seen started stomping off towards the road, parallel to the path we were on, but probably 50 to 100 feet deeper in the woods. Woods which were too thick to see anything at that distance. For some godforsaken reason, we tried to run after it. Jay and I were very athletic as 6th or 7th graders could be. We played tons of sports and were fast kids. We were hauling ass down the path parallel to the beast, as fast as we could sprint, and yet it was absolutely smoking us. The road, if I remember correctly, was a solid 1/4 of a mile from the intersection of the two paths. We had just finished running down the downhill portion when this monster was already to the road, and believe it or not, we could tell where it was from the crunching leaves, and you could hear its massive footsteps clear as day even while running. When we realized it was getting to the road, we also realized a car was coming. I shit you not, as soon as the crunching leaves stopped and the thing stepped down to the road, the car slammed on its brakes and pounded on the horn. Its tires screeched for a solid 3 to 4 seconds at least. When the car finally stopped, we heard the leaves start crunching on the other side of the road, and then the car slammed on the gas, peeling out again, and took off like a bat out of hell. Keep in mind, we could only hear all of this. We didn't see the car, so there's no way we could ever track the person down to ask what they saw. But I wouldn't be surprised if this story is out there on the internet somewhere, about the time they almost turned a Bigfoot into roadkill. Anyways, we finally made it to the road and crossed to the other side. On that side, it was mostly flat woods, as far as the eye could see. Nothing but trees, trees, and more trees. No sight nor sound of the beast. We waited for a bit, then went back home. A few things to note. Was it a Bigfoot for sure? I can't say. But what I do know is that it was tall, hairy, grey, and 100% bipedal. There was absolutely no mistaking the sound of it running. It's funny though, there's descriptions, videos, etc. of Bigfoot walking and moving far faster than a normal human. But I'm almost sure this thing was sprinting. The speed at which it reached the road was utterly unbelievable. It ran a 1/4 mile in probably close to 20 seconds, and trust me, I understand how absurd that is. Hello watchers and listeners. If you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing. A huge thank you to all the Reddit users who allowed me to use their stories. Links to each story will be in the description below. If you have any stories you would like to share on my channel, please send them to my email, which is also in the description below. As always, a huge thank you to everyone who continues to support me. I really do appreciate it. Stay safe.